The air crackled with tension as Maria adjusted her microphone, her gaze locked on the man across from her. He was known only as the Voice of the Night to his fervent listeners, a moniker that seemed all too fitting now, considering the eerie glow of the dim studio lights casting long shadows across his face. His eyes, piercing yet somehow distant, flicked briefly to meet hers, a hint of amusement, or was it malice, playing at the edges of his thin lips. "So, Maria," he began, his voice smooth, almost hypnotic, flowing through the airwaves with an unsettling ease, "you're here to uncover the man behind the voice, the stories behind the silence. But are you prepared for what you might find?" Maria's heart skipped a beat. She was here for the scoop of her career, yet something in the pit of her stomach screamed that she was playing with fire. "I'm here for the truth," she replied, her voice steady despite the growing knot of apprehension. The Voice of the Night leaned back in his chair, the corners of his mouth twitching upwards. "The truth," he echoed as if tasting the word. "A noble quest. Let's start with something light, shall we? An appetizer before the main course of darkness." He paused, and for a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the studio equipment. He dove into a tale, a story about a listener who claimed to have seen the shadow of death itself. The way he recounted the tale with vivid descriptions of fear and the palpable sense of dread that followed the listener felt all too real. Maria found herself leaning in, caught up in the narrative, until he described how the shadow consumed the listener's life, leaving nothing but an empty husk. "It's fascinating, isn't it?" he mused, locking eyes with Maria. "How closely fear and fascination walk hand in hand. But these are just the shallow waters, Maria. Are you ready to dive deeper where the light doesn't reach?" A chill ran down Maria's spine. There was something in his gaze, an intensity that held her captive. She realized then that this interview, this man, was unlike anything she'd ever encountered. "Yes," she found herself saying, the word escaping her lips before she could consider its weight. "I'm ready." His smile widened, not with warmth, but with a cold anticipation. "Excellent," he whispered, almost gleefully. "Let's peel back the layers of reality, shall we? Let's explore the darkness that dwells in the hearts of men, and perhaps find what lurks in your own." The studio's dim light flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room as the Voice of the Night rose from his seat, a signal for Maria to follow. "Let's take a little walk," he suggested, his tone casual yet laced with an undercurrent of something sinister. The air seemed to thicken around Maria as she stood, a sense of dread wrapping around her like a shroud. They moved through a narrow corridor, the walls lined with soundproofing foam that swallowed their footsteps, amplifying the silence between them. The Voice of the Night led her to a heavy, unmarked door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "Behind this door lies the heart of my world," he said, turning to lock eyes with her. His gaze was an abyss, threatening to pull her into its depths. "Are you sure you want to see?" Maria's instincts screamed for her to flee, but the drive for the story, for the truth, anchored her in place. "Yes," she replied, her voice a mere whisper against the weight of her apprehension. The door creaked open to reveal a room that was starkly different from the rest of the studio. It was meticulously organized, with shelves lining the walls, each filled with what appeared to be personal items, photographs, jewelry, letters, all bathed in the soft, accusing light of a single lamp. "This," the Voice of the Night announced, spreading his arms wide, "is my collection. Each piece tells a story, a moment frozen in time, a life touched by fear nor by me." His fingers brushed against a locket on a nearby shelf, a touch almost reverent. Maria's heart raced as she stepped closer, her eyes scanning the items. Each piece seemed ordinary, yet in this context they screamed of tales untold. Her gaze landed on a photograph of a young woman, her smile frozen in time, yet her eyes seemed to whisper secrets of darkness and despair. "These are trophies?" Maria asked, her voice steady despite the storm of fear brewing inside her. "Trophies, mementos, call them what you will," he replied, his voice smooth as silk yet cold as ice. "They serve as reminders of the fragile nature of human existence, of the ease with which peace can be shattered." The air in the room felt heavy, charged with an energy that sent shivers down Maria's spine. It was as if the very walls were saturated with the echoes of those who once owned these items, their silent pleas and unspoken fears hanging in the balance. "Why show me this?" Maria's question was a lifeline thrown into the dark waters in which she found herself. "Because, my dear, you are now part of the story. A story of curiosity, of bravery, or perhaps folly," the voice of the night said, his eyes gleaming with a disturbing intensity. "The question is, how will your story end? Will you become another piece in my collection, a whisper in the dark?" The threat hung in the air between them, a palpable force that tightened around Maria's chest. She realized with a sinking feeling that this interview, this exploration into the heart of darkness, had taken a turn she could never have anticipated. As they stepped back into the corridor, the door closing with a finality that echoed in Maria's ears, she knew that she had crossed a threshold. There was no going back, only forward into the shadows that awaited her. Maria's mind raced as they returned to the main studio, the weight of her situation pressing down like a physical force. The voice of the night resumed his seat, his demeanor calm, as if they hadn't just walked through a gallery of human despair. "Now, Maria," he began, his voice taking on a new, ominous tone, "let's add a layer of excitement to our evening." The light seemed to dim further, casting his face into deeper shadows, transforming him from a mere host into the master of ceremonies for some macabre game. "Tonight you're not just an interviewer," he continued, a twisted smile playing on his lips. "You're the star of your very own tale of suspense and survival." Maria felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The voice of the night leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "It's simple, really. You seek the truth, the essence of fear. So, I propose a challenge. Find your way out of this building before midnight and you're free to leave with your story. Fail and, well, I suppose you'll become a permanent part of my collection." Maria's heart pounded in her chest. This had to be a sick joke, but one look into his eyes and she knew he was deadly serious. "You're insane," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Insanity, sanity, such arbitrary labels we place on human behavior," he mused, standing up. "The door is unlocked, Maria. Your time starts now." The sudden shift from an interview to a twisted survival game paralyzed Maria for a moment, but survival instincts kicked in, propelling her to stand. She glanced at the clock, 10:15 p.m., less than 2 hours to escape this nightmare. As she stepped into the corridor, the studio's usual silence was replaced by a low, ominous hum. It seemed as if the building itself was alive, aware of her plight. The hallway stretched out, doors lining each side like silent sentinels, each potentially hiding horrors untold. Maria tried the first door to her right, locked, the second the same. Panic began to set in as she realized this was no simple maze. It was a labyrinth designed with a sinister purpose. Turning a corner, she stumbled upon a room with its door ajar. Inside, dimly lit by the flicker of an old television set, were stacks of videotapes, each labeled with dates and names. The realization hit her like a wave of ice-cold water. These were recordings of the voice of the night's previous games. She forced herself to watch one, hoping for clues. The footage was grainy, The sounds muffled, but the terror of the person trying to escape was unmistakable. Maria watched, heart in her throat, as their desperate search ended in a scream, cut abruptly by static. A voice behind her made her jump. "Do you understand now, Maria?" The voice of the night's words slithered into her ears. "You're part of something much bigger. Your fear, your desperation. It's delicious." Maria turned to face him, fear mingling with anger. "Why are you doing this?" "For the same reason you chase your stories, Maria. For the thrill of it. For the story." His eyes gleamed in the TV's flickering light. "Now, I suggest you keep moving. Time is ticking, and this building holds more secrets than you can imagine." With that, he vanished as quietly as he had appeared, leaving Maria alone with the tapes and her mounting dread. She realized then that her only option was to push forward, to outsmart the voice of the night at his own twisted game. With every step Maria took through the winding corridors, a growing sense of despair wrapped its cold fingers around her heart. The eerie silence of the building seemed to mock her attempts at escape, a labyrinth designed not just to confuse, but to crush any flicker of hope. As she wandered, lost and alone, a chilling realization dawned on her. There was no way out. The voice of the night had crafted this game with meticulous care, a predator playing with his prey before the final fatal strike. Driven by a desperate, irrational sliver of hope, Maria made her way back to the studio where this nightmare had begun. The familiar hum of the broadcasting equipment filled the air, a cruel reminder of the normalcy that had once been. She approached the microphone she had sat at just an hour ago, the tool of her trade, now her only lifeline. With shaking hands, she flipped the switch, the red light blinking to life, signaling that the airwaves were open. Drawing in a ragged breath, she leaned close to the microphone, her voice a mix of fear and defiance. "Please, if anyone is listening, I need help. I'm trapped with the voice of the night. Please, you have to help me." Her plea was cut short by a sound that chilled the blood, a thud loud and ominous, resonating through the airwaves. Silence followed, a heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to stretch on endlessly. Then, as if nothing had happened, the voice of the night's smooth, unfazed tone filled the room. "Sorry, we're having a little technical difficulty." Michael's eyes shot open as the 3-mile countersy radio frequency crackled to life, slicing through the silence of his dimly lit basement. "Hello, Michael," a voice dripped through the speakers, unsettlingly familiar, yet impossible to place. The static buzzed in the background like a swarm of invisible insects, edging closer. "Here's the deal," the voice continued, its tone laced with a promise and a threat all at once. "I'm offering you a shot at your biggest dream, wealth beyond your imagination. But Michael, dreams come at a cost. For a little trust, I'll throw you a freebie clue. To show I'm not messing around." Michael's heart pounded against his chest. This had to be a joke, right? A prank. Yet, the cold chill down his spine told him otherwise. "What's the catch?" he found himself asking, voice barely above a whisper. "No catch. Just a friendly wager from the future. Tomorrow, bet all your savings, $2,300 on your favorite hockey team. Bet they'll lose by 3. Do that and let's talk again." The absurdity of the voice's claim battled with the adrenaline surging through Michael. This was madness. Yet what if? The thought gnawed at him, a dangerous seed of hope taking root. "Who are you?" Michael demanded, his voice steadier now. But the only response was a laugh, chilling and devoid of humor, before the line drowned back into static. That night, Michael lay awake, the voice's offer replaying in his mind like a broken record. It was crazy, insane even, but the possibility of what if That tiny, nagging chance. Was it worth ignoring? As dawn broke, Michael made his decision. Michael's heart was racing, a mix of disbelief and thrill pumping through his veins as he watched the game unfold exactly as the voice had predicted. His team lost 1-4, turning his measly 2,300ers into a staggering 11-2. He couldn't believe it. The righty homo was electric his wife and Dr. Buzing with excitement over their unexpected windfall, completely oblivious to the source of their good fortune. But as they neared their neighborhood, the jubilant atmosphere shattered. Sirens wailed in the distance, a grim soundtrack to the thick column of smoke staining the night sky. Michael's stomach sank as he realized the smoke was coming from their street, their home. Pulling up to the scene, his worst fears were confirmed. Their house was engulfed in flames, firefighters battling the inferno that consumed everything they owned. The shock was palpable, the air thick with despair as they watched their life go up in smoke. His wife's silent tears and his daughter's stunned disbelief mirrored his own horror. This couldn't be happening. They retreated to his parents' house, a temporary refuge from the nightmare. As they sat in the dim light of the living room, numb and exhausted, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this disaster was no coincidence. The voice, the bet, the fire. It all connected somehow, but the thought was too terrifying to fully accept. The night was restless, plagued with haunting thoughts and what-ifs. By the time dawn crept in, Michael knew what he had to do. He retrieved the old radio from his car, a heavy sense of dread anchoring each step as he descended into his parents' basement. The moment he turned on the radio, the voice was there, as if it had been waiting. "Do you believe me now, Michael?" it taunted. Anger and fear collided within him. "Did you do this?" he demanded. But the voice only spoke of coincidences and chances, sidestepping guilt with infuriating calmness. "No more," Michael insisted, a mix of defiance and desperation in his voice. But the voice's parting words left him cold. "We'll see if you change your mind, Michael. For now, goodbye." As the day unfolded, reality set in. The fire had left them with nothing. Their insurance expired, their savings gone. The weight of their debts and the uncertainty of the future pressed down like a physical force, suffocating and relentless. That night, Michael faced the silent radio, a battle raging within. Pride, despair, hope, fear. It all blended into a toxic cocktail that clouded his judgment. Finally, breaking the silence, he whispered into the void, "I'm ready." Instantly, the voice responded, a smirk audible in its tone. "You have $10,600 left. Tomorrow, invest it all. And don't worry about the price. It won't be possessions this time, but something far more precious." Michael's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" he stammered, but the voice was cryptic, offering no clarity, only a chilling certainty that whatever was to come, the cost would be unimaginable. The next morning, Michael's mind was a war zone of dread and second guesses. The cryptic warning from the voice haunted him, its words echoing like a death knell for something or someone dear. But the spiraling vortex of debt and the allure of a fresh start clouded his judgment, pushing him toward a decision that felt increasingly like a pact with the devil. He made the investment. Every cent of the $2,600 poured into a shadowy startup the voice had whispered about. A gamble on the fringes of sanity driven by a voice from a frequency that shouldn't exist. The wait for the outcome was agonizing, each tick of the clock a heavy thud against his conscience. As the week crept by, the world around Michael seemed to darken, the air thick with an unspoken menace. Then Friday arrived, bringing with it a miracle, or a curse masquerading as one. The startup exploded on the market, its value skyrocketing beyond wild speculation. Michael was rich, unimaginably so. He kept the news to himself, a secret albatross around his neck as they took an evening walk, a feeble attempt to find normalcy in a world that had skewed into the surreal. The conversation was mundane, a distracting babble against the internal scream of his anxiety. Then, in an instant, everything changed. "Where's Mommy?" The question, innocent and confused, from his daughter sliced through him. Panic surged as he spun around, the empty street mocking him with its silent darkness. His wife, just there a moment ago, vanished without a trace. The alley's shadows seemed to thicken, swallowing every desperate call for his wife. His daughter's cries, a piercing soundtrack to his terror, suddenly cut off as he turned to find her also gone. Alone, in the engulfing night, Michael's world crumbled. His knees hit the ground, a broken man swallowed by the abyss he had gambled with. Police sirens eventually pierced the night. The officers found him, a shell of a man, babbling about voices and bets and choices made in the dark. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into Michael's wrists as he sat in the back of the patrol car, the blur of red and blue lights casting eerie shadows around him. His mind was a hurricane of confusion and despair, unable to grasp the reality that had twisted so nightmarishly out of control. At the station, the interrogation room felt like a tomb, the sterile light too bright against his dark thoughts. The detective's questions hammered at him, each one a nail in the coffin of his sanity. They spoke of evidence, of searches, of trying to piece together the events of the night. But all Michael could see when he closed his eyes were the faces of his wife and daughter, now just ghosts in his memory. The hours stretched, each minute an eternity of agony, and then the moment he had been dreading, the detectives returned, their faces grim. The words they spoke were a death sentence to any hope he had clung to. Strangled, in the bushes, along the alley, the details blurred into a cacophony of horror, the reality of their deaths a blow from which he could never recover. Released due to the surveillance footage that absolved him of the crime, but condemned him to a life of grief. Michael stumbled out into the dawn, a man unmoored from life itself. The world around him felt surreal, a nightmare from which he could not wake. He wandered aimless and broken until he found himself in front of a motel, its neon sign flickering like a beacon for the lost. Inside his room, time lost meaning. Sleep was a fleeting escape, punctuated by nightmares more merciful than his waking hell. When he finally emerged from the depths of his despair, the first thing he did was check the status of the investment, a morbid curiosity to see the full extent of the devil's bargain he had struck. The numbers on the screen mocked him. They were twice as much as the voice had promised.